Okay, we're continuing on. We left off last time with an addition to our enemy that allowed us to kill the poor evil enemy. Alright, we can now smack him one, take that, create a dead enemy, and some cool little blood effects. So we can attack the enemy, but boy, it doesn't seem very fair. It's time now to allow our enemy to attack the player. And you can see, if you remember back to when we were setting up the enemy, that we created an enumeration that included all kinds of different states for our enemy, even though right now we're just using the hit and the idle and the move. Let's go ahead and add an attack state. Okay. And we will create it as other user event 3. This will be the attack state. And what is going to happen in our attack state? Well, believe it or not, this is relatively basic compared to some of the other stuff we've done. Here's what we're going to do. First, we will update our image speed. And we're going to make it be kind of quick. And the end result will be that the animation is going to play. Boy, it's going to play quick. It's going to look like our poor player is just being clobbered by the enemy. All right. And we're going to say if sprite hit frame. This is that custom function that we can pass in a specific frame and to look to see if we've hit that yet in the animation that's associated with a sprite. What we want to do is set up some local variables. One we're going to call damage, set it equal to 1. One we're going to call knockback, set it equal to 4. One we're going to call life, set it equal to 1. I wonder if this is sounding familiar at all here. What we're doing here is we're doing the same kind of setup we did back on our player. Right here, damage, knockback, remember? Life, same set of local variables that we were doing, all in preparation to create a hitbox, that long and painful script that reads in 7 different arguments in order to set up and create a hitbox. Well, we're going to do the same thing for our enemy. We're going to allow our enemy to create its own hitbox, and that hitbox is going to be able to do damage to the player. So we can use that same script, even though it was complicated. Once it's set up, now we can make use of it for lots of different things. So create hitbox, oops, and let's pass in a whole ton of stuff. What are we going to pass in? Well, we need to know which sprite to use for the hitbox. I wonder if we have the sprite yet. No, let's take a look up at our sprites. I think I gave them to you in the original setup. Yep, S Skeleton Hitbox. That's the one we're going to create. S Skeleton Hitbox. Then we need to say where are we going to place it. We'll just go X, and then we're going to go Y minus 8, just because that worked about right. And then what's the angle? Well, our sprite is just a circle, so the angle doesn't make any difference, which is nice, makes things a little easier. Then we need to pass this life value. That's how long the hitbox is going to live, remember? Okay. Then we need to pass an array that includes all of the objects in the game that will be susceptible to being damaged by the hitbox that our enemy is going to create. And the only thing that's going to be able to be damaged is the player. And remember, we can also set the player to be invincible briefly if we want to, but this will at least allow the player potentially to be damaged by the enemy's hitbox. Then we're going to pass in a value to say how much damage does a single smack of this hitbox cause, and we'll pass in information about the amount of force that this hitbox is going to impart on the thing that it collides with, in this case the enemy, or the player I should say. So we'll create a hitbox to do all of that stuff, and then we'll play a sound. And the sound we're going to play is called SN Pain. Give it a priority of 10, and we don't want it to loop. Okay. So it's very similar setup to what we did on the player's hitbox. We'll do it on the enemy's hitbox as well. Then we're going to do another check here. We're going to say if sprite hit frame, and we want to check basically if we are hitting the last image in the animation that is on the enemy. Okay, this is a way to get us out of the attack state and back into an idle state. So we're going to say image number -1. So remember, image number is going to tell us how many frames there are in the sprite that's associated with the enemy when it is in its attack state, which we've not set up yet. We're going to have different sprites for that. Okay? But once we've reached that last image, the last frame within the sprite that's associated with the enemy when it's in its attack mode, we'll use that information to put us back into the enemy's idle state. So state equals skeleton.idle. We will update the sprite that we want to show for that. It's going to be S enemy run down. We'll set an alarm 1 equal to some crazy number. Right? We're going to say 2 times game get speed game speed FPS, and it doesn't like this little @ symbol, which we don't want to. All right. So what is going on there? So remember, that's all we need, by the way, for this attack state for our enemy. So I want to explain what's happening with this alarm 1 here. Remember that on our enemy, if I come back in, when we set up our enemy, we set an alarm there, if you remember, and we use this alarm to switch, to set a timer basically that we then use to switch from the idle state into the move state. And then when we're in the move state, so when we create our enemy skeleton in this case, we set an alarm on the create event that's either instantly going to start the enemy moving, or after a second is going to start the enemy moving. Then in the move state, we set that alarm again, and we use it this time to determine how long is the enemy going to stay in the move state before it switches back again into the idle state. That's what this does. Okay? So in the attack state, it's the same idea. We're switching back to the idle state, then we're setting an alarm that we'll use to determine basically how long we're going to stay in this state. Okay? Because we got this check here, right? Okay, so how much time elapses once we move back into the idle state before this alarm goes off, which then sets us back into the move state. Okay, so we switch back to idle from here. Once we're into idle, then we move again into the move state after, you know, a very short period of time. All right. Now, this is not all quite working yet, right? Why not? Well, there are a few things that are not set up yet in here. One is that we have no way to move into the attack state. We've got to figure out a way to make that happen. So the way we're going to enable the enemy to move into the attack state is through a script. Okay. And we're going to create a script called over here. Got all these different objects. Let's get into our scripts. There we go. Let's call this script I'll call it skeleton attack. Now, if I had multiple enemies, I might not want to call it skeleton attack. I might want to call it enemy attack and then be able to use it for any of our different enemy attacks. But that's fine. We'll just call it skeleton attack because we're only going to have one enemy in this version of the game that we're using for class. So first I want to make sure that the player exists in the room, and I'm only going to call this script if the player is still there. That's to prevent a case where you may have killed off the enemy, even though we haven't set that up, but the skeleton might still be trying to attack, which could run an error. So we're going to say if not instance exists O player exit. Now this it actually makes no difference right now, but it's just to save us for if you're creating a more elaborate version of this RPG game from a specific case in which the player may have been killed, but still being trying to have an attack come from the enemy. All right, so now we'll create a local variable called distance to player, if I can type correctly, and we'll set that equal to point distance. Remember this built-in math function? Oh, math. Player dot x o player dot y. So what is this doing again? Well, the reminder is this will take 2 points and it will return what is the distance between this first point and this second point. And so what we want to do is we're going to check repeatedly if the enemy is within a specific distance of the player, and if the enemy is within that specific distance of the player or less, we'll move into an attack state. Okay? In order to do that, we need to know how far apart at the moment the player is from this specific instance of the enemy. That's what we're doing here. So we'll store that information. How far away is the player from this instance of the enemy? Then we'll say if distance to player is less than something. Choose whatever you want. I'm going to say less than 40 pixels. So it's pretty close. Then I'm going to change the state to skeleton.attack. So we'll switch into the attack state. We'll set the image index equal to 0 to make sure we're showing the first image in the set of images. Then we're going to run this get direction facing so that we can make sure that the enemy is going to be facing the direction that the player is in relationship to the enemy. Okay? So, well, let me say that again. We want to switch into the attack state, and we want to make sure that within each time we run this, each time we do this check, that the enemy is going to be facing toward the player. Okay? And so to do that, we can use get direction facing. And then in order to figure out which direction the player is in relationship to the enemy, we can use point direction, our current position, okay, which is the position of the enemy, of this copy of the enemy, and oPlayer.x and oPlayer.y. Okay. Get direction facing, and then do you understand what's happening? What in the world does this do? Remember, when we call this get direction facing, what we're doing is we're going to store 0, 1, 2, or 3 into an instance variable called direction facing. Okay? So how are we gathering that 0, 1, 2, or 3? Well, we call this point direction, which is going to create a line from the first set of points to the second set of points, and then tell us what the angle is of that line, And the angle is going to be somewhere between 0 and 360 degrees, which then we convert into 0, 1, 2, or 3. Right? All right. So then we can check that. If direction facing equals enemy dir dot left image x scale equals -1, else image x scale equals 1. We did this a second ago, right, when we were working just with the sort of regular version of our enemy. So same idea. We go into our attack mode, make sure we're showing the first image in the animation, figuring out what the angle is between the player and the enemy, converting that into a left, right, up or down direction, and then having the enemy face that direction. Okay? Okay. All right, in order for this to do anything, we have to actually call, we've got to call this, right? So let's go into our idle state. This is the initial state that our enemy is going to be in, okay? And just in case we have an instance where right when the enemy appears in the room, at that first instant, the player is within 40 pixels, then we want to be able to have the enemy attack, even if it hasn't started moving yet. So we're going to say skeleton underscore attack. And we don't pass it anything. Just like that. Okay. Now, this is a pretty unlikely scenario since we move into the move state so quickly. So we better do the same thing in our move state. I'm going to come all the way down to the very end after all this stuff and just paste it in there. Now, right now, things aren't going to work super great because we don't have any images set up yet for our enemy in its attack state. But if I come in close, in fact, it's unhappy, right? It's going to throw an error. So it's saying, all right, show when we have hit frame 3, then do a bunch of stuff. Well, it's complaining because it's saying frame 3 is out of range. There is no such thing. And that's because we have not set up the sprites yet, and the sprite that we're that we're trying to check for doesn't exist, and so that is a problem. Okay, so we've got this enemy. We have them in here, right? We did set them up. So where is the problem occurring? Do you know? Come on, I'll bet you know. The problem is that here on our enemy, in the create event, we have not set up yet in our array a collection of images for the attack. So I'm going to grab this set of move sprites, paste that in, come down here and update this to say attack. Like so. And then similarly here, this is assuming that you have set up your enemy attack sprites, the left, right, and down sprites. If you've not done this, then you're going to run into an error. Make sure you understand what I'm just saying. So here in my enemy sprites, I've already set up the attack down using the spear, and the attack up and the attack right. Okay, so you need to have those exist and set up in your array so that when you switch into the attack mode, you see now this guy's attacking and attacking and attacking. Pretty cool, right? And he's facing the right direction. If I move up here and come down, it hits me from above, and he's not in a great position. If I go away, then he just switches back and starts wandering around again. Excellent. Now, he's not actually doing any damage to me right now, which is not not great. I would like to be able to be injured by the enemy. So let's set that up. To do that, I'm going to come out of my enemy object, go back into my player object, and here in my player object, I'm going to add a collision with the hitbox. And just like we did when we were setting up the attack from the player to the enemy, we're going to use this hurt box thing that we set up. If hurt box object can be hit other than player health minus equals 10. Okay, we covered this in class, but this hurt box object can be hit is just saying that if it is possible, if the player is not invincible at the moment and the player object is included in the list and the array of things that can be hit by the hitbox, then allow that to be damaged. Now, to make that all work, here on the player's create event, in addition to setting it up as a movement object, I need to set it up as something that could potentially be hurt. Same thing we did before with the enemy, right? And if you remember, all this is going to do is create an instance variable called invincible and set it to false. All right, let's give that a try. Now we come along, here's our enemy, we run right up to him, and boom, you can see my health is dropping and dropping and dropping, and we've not set anything up to happen when the player's health reaches 0, so nothing will happen. We can kill our little guy and just continue on our way, but look at that, we were able to create the ability for our player to destroy and do damage to the enemy, and for the enemy now to be able to attack and destroy the player if we were to set things up so the player can actually die.